We're talking about mental illness. We have been building a mental disorder stool in the last several videos that we have done. I'm talking with Dr. Daniel Berger. And so in this episode, we want to talk about this third leg of what people call mental illness. Stay tuned. Hello everyone, Rick Thomas here with Dr. Daniel Berger. We're doing life over coffee, and we have been talking a lot about this idea of mental illness. Daniel has built us a structure here, and so mental illness is the construct, and then we have talked a lot about one leg being deception, insanity, madness. So we talked in the last video, the last episode, about this idea of being impaired. And if you haven't watched these videos, please jump back on them and watch them. You will benefit from them. Daniel has done a lot of studying under this topic here. He has written 5 books on just mental illness, as well as other books like The Insanity of Madness and this book here, Saving Abnormal. And so there's a lot of material that you can benefit from. But Daniel, as you're building out this structure of mental illness, you said there's a third category that people lump into mental illness, but it's not really legit. And so we have insanity, deception, which can be classified as mental illness. We can have impairment, an ongoing episode, an ongoing struggle that a person may have that they just can't seem to work through, can be labeled as mental illness. And then we have a third leg, but it's not really legit. So what is that?
Well, I guess there's a couple things here. First of all, history would be helpful to understand. How do we get these into the classification of alleged mental disorders in the DSM-5?
How did that get into DSM? Okay.
Yeah. How do we begin to classify valid neurological issues as alleged mental disorders? And it may be helpful too to recognize that there's a difference significantly between a psychiatrist and a neurologist. So neurologists are actually dealing with neurological problems historically, and psychiatrists have been dealing with psych issues, soul issues, right. Mind issues. Jeffrey Lieberman, who is the former president of the American Psychiatric Association, in fact, his name is the president-elect within the DSM-5. So he was overseeing the DSM-5 being published. He actually says that neurologists get upset at psychiatrists because essentially psychiatrists are pretending to be neurologists.
Right.
They're telling us all of our problems are neurological, but there's actually no scientific proof to that, and there still is none. But that's the claim. So a lot of psychiatrists now are actually going to school to be neurologists in order not only to prove this theory, but also it kind of bolsters this argument, right? That, okay, you're a neurologist and you're dealing with these issues now. So it's been a crafty, but psychiatrists and neurologists are 2 separate categories. Others have also noted that when valid problems are actually shown to be biological, they're no longer considered to be mental illness in most cases. So psychiatrists almost feel like they lose if there were to be validated constructs and these were shown to be biological, they would actually lose that and neurologists would treat it. So with that being said, the history goes back to Emil Kraepelin. And what Kraepelin did, and we've talked about Kraepelin in the history of discrimination, but one of his students was Louis Alzheimer. And we've mentioned him a little bit, but I want to go more in depth here. Alzheimer actually disagreed with Kraepelin's theory, and when one of his patients died, he actually did an autopsy and found what are today called plaques and tangles that are biological markers. So if someone has Alzheimer's disease, they have a physical place in their brain, places that have what are called plaques and tangles. You can see those within the right medical tools. And of course, diagnostic, the diagnostic tools are not quite here to see those until the person dies, unfortunately. Right. But that will come, I'm confident of. What happened was Louis Alzheimer actually died shortly after his discovery, and Kraepelin took his finding and published it in his first book of nostalgia, or his first alleged book of mental disorders. And so he said, look, we have found plaques and tangles for Alzheimer's disease. We will surely find what we call now schizophrenia, bipolar, he called premature dementia as far as schizophrenia goes. So he was saying, look, we found biological causes. Hang with me here and we will find. And this has actually been a basis of looking at things like psychosis or schizophrenia as biologically caused, even though there is no biology. An article just came out in Harvard Review of Psychiatry stating the same thing. There's still no biology after decades and decades and decades of promising there would be. But it's called a mental illness because Kraepelin put Alzheimer's disease, he labeled that within this first book of Nostalgia.
That's called cheating, right?
Well, it's and I'm not.
You take something real and you connect your theory to it to legitimize your theory.
And I'm not saying Kraepelin didn't actually believe his theory. I mean, it wasn't like he was saying, I'm just going to hoodwink people. But that whole eugenic theory was based on, it's actually what compelled scientifically the Nazis to accept Kraepelinianism, the whole eugenic theory that Ernst Rudin carried out.
Well, I think your point here, I don't want to digress at least too much, but your point needs to be highlighted. A lot of people who believe what they believe, I don't give ill motive to.
Right, that's right.
It could be in his case, you want to believe something so much that you read into things. We do this all the time. It's called eisegesis. We have an idea, and we want affirmation of the idea, and so we read into text what the text is not saying, and then we use the text to support our theory, and it's a false connection. And so we all do this, and so I'm not saying that they're out to necessarily destroy something.
Said. Yeah. So, and since then, there's been other things. We've done a series on autism. I don't know if it'll show before or after this, but autism is another case in point of this. This is a valid physical issue that was developed and put in as a mental disorder, when in fact it's not a mental disorder. It's a physical, social problem, etc. So it should not be included in the DSM-5. Dementia, Alzheimer's. Of course, Alzheimer's now is lumped in to dementia. I also mentioned, and I think it's worth going back and looking at in Job chapter 12, I believe it's verse 2 if I'm not mistaken, but it says that God takes away the discernment of the elderly. And when we talked about autism, we mentioned this verse, and that word literally means to taste. So it's translated as discernment in a lot of the translations because as people get older, their brains do deteriorate. This is what brain deterioration looks like. It's not what mental health experts are saying. One of my friends, Dr. Hugh Clark, is a neurosurgeon. He's retired now. He actually pointed this out, that there is nothing known within neuroscience of what they're calling mental disorder. That doesn't invalid physical injury or impairment or disfigurement. The brain responds, motor skills and speech and memory and things like that. Those are neurological problems, not what they're calling. So this whole category, if people are diagnosed within, should not be considered to be a mental illness, even though secularists are claiming it.
Who are the discerners? I mean, you've got this gray area, and somebody comes in and says, "I have a mental disorder, but it's an organic biological problem." How do we care for a person to walk them through to maybe separate it, that actually this is not a psychic a soul problem, but this is a physical problem? The church, by and large, can't navigate through this. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and so you take an autistic child, for example, who is what we would say is on the severe end. Maybe they're nonverbal. Well, you can't tell them to give you an answer and expect them to answer. So there's no way for them to do that. That would be, I mean, this person is, it's not that they're being rebellious. They're not able to do that. Clearly, as the elderly digress. So what we're calling dementia, I personally, and this is my personal understanding and belief, I don't believe it's an actual disease. I believe it's what Job 12 says, that the natural running down of the body includes the brain, which
Right.
looks like what we're calling dementia. So we can, do all we can to not get dementia, but ultimately that's not. I mean, literally that verse says that God removes. So before that, he says he takes away the speech of the counselors, godly people that we know, who have given sound advice, preachers. Towards the end of their life, many times they lose their voice. They can't speak rationally and clearly. It's not what we call mental illness. It's what we would call dementia. They're not remembering people. They're not having the discernment that they once had. That's what Job is describing.
Yeah, they're running out of gas.
Yeah.
I mean, they're on fumes now.
And it should be expected that all elderly will go down this
Yeah.
route.
I'm on about an eighth of a tank right now,
Yeah.
and anyway, that's another. Maybe that's another video that we're on. So we're talking about mental illness, mental disorder, and so there's the deception aspect, the madness, insanity aspect. There's the impairment, which is there's some subjectivity there as well, but it can get up under mental illness. But then this other category, we really need to parse it out to see what are we really talking about here. Is it organic, non-organic, and there is a lot of wisdom that's needed in that area. Which book would you have, or do you have one that speaks with clarity to this, or is there one upcoming?
So in the series on mental illness, I do lay out these three. In the volume 1, I lay out these three categories, but not in depth. I kind of flesh it out as we go through the series of books. And then The Truth About ADHD, specifically on autism, the series we do on autism, I've got a whole chapter where I lay these things out as well to differentiate between what they're calling ADHD and these biological issues.
Yeah, I would encourage you, if you don't have Daniel's library, that you start adding those books to your library. This is one that's been sitting here through all of our series, Saving Abnormal. It's an excellent book for you to get, but there's several others, and you can find them on Amazon. One other thing is that Daniel does public speaking, and so if you want to have him come and speak, and it doesn't matter the demographic. I mean, it can be a general public conference that he would do, or it can be with a tighter specificity on mental illness, talking to biblical counselors, but however you want to do the configuration. But he's very open to doing it.
We can do it together too.
And we can do it together. I don't know when this video is going to drop, but last year Daniel and I did the Hope Conference together. That was our first time. It was in Sarasota, Florida at the Calvary Chapel Church there, and we're going to be down there in January of 2021. Again, I don't know when we're dropping here on this video. But yeah, I can tag along too if you want, but I do want you to have Daniel and have him to speak at your conferences. But the easier thing to do, the simpler thing to do would be to jump on his books and just go through the list of what he's written, and whichever one piques your interest. I really encourage you to get them and start reading them and start having discussions within your family, within your close network of friends, because as I was saying to him earlier, like, where are the discerners? Where are the people that can look at this idea of mental illness and parse it out in those three legs, and then get within each one of those, and to be able to walk people through? The struggles are legitimate. I mean, people are struggling with real issues, but there is a battle over naming rights. How are we going to name this? And then as we name it, there's a process that leads in antithetical directions. And so it's important that we're bringing biblical wisdom to these very real problems that we are discerning. Thanks so much for watching the video. Hope you all have a blessed day.